I came home that night with grease still under my fingernails, the kind that never washes out no matter how hard you scrub. The air was thick, humid, sticking to my skin as I climbed the rickety stairs of the Elm Street apartment building. 5 years I'd lived here. 5 years of creaking floors and flickering hallway lights, but it was home. My boots scuffed the worn linoleum, and I was thinking about the cold beer waiting in my fridge when I saw it, a piece of paper nailed to my door like a death sentence. Red letters, bold and cruel, screamed, "Eviction notice." My stomach dropped. I stood there, keys dangling in my hand, the world tilting under my feet. My name is Isaac, and this is how my life turned upside down. I ripped the notice off, the nail clattering to the floor. "Vacate in 30 days, it read. No reason, no explanation, just my name in black ink and a signature at the bottom. Mr. Hargrove, the landlord. My hands shook as I read it again, hoping I'd missed something, some fine print that made this a mistake. But it was real. I unlocked my door, stepped inside, and slumped onto the couch, the paper crumpling in my fist. My apartment was small, cluttered with tools and car manuals, the walls stained from years of living. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Now, it felt like a trap closing around me. I couldn't sleep that night. The words 30 days echoed in my head, each tick of the clock a countdown to losing everything. I thought about Hargrove, that slick man with his cheap suits and fake smile, always jingling coins in his pocket like he owned the world. He'd raised the rent twice in the last year, squeezing every tenant until we bled pennies. I paid on, time, every month, even when it meant skipping meals. Why me? Why now? I paced the apartment, the floorboards groaning under my weight, my anger growing with every step. By morning I was wired, fueled by coffee and rage, determined to find answers. The next day, I knocked on Mrs. Delgado's door across the hall. She was a widow, always baking cookies for the kids in the building, her apartment smelling like cinnamon and hope. "Isaac, mijo, what's wrong?" she asked, her eyes soft but worried. I showed her the notice, my voice tight. "They're kicking me out." Her face fell and she pulled me inside, glancing down the hall like someone might be listening. "I heard rumors," she whispered, her hands twisting her apron. "Hargrove's got a new tenant, some rich guy from uptown, willing to pay double. He's clearing out anyone who can't match it." My jaw clenched. Double. I was barely scraping by as a mechanic, fixing cars for folks who tipped in loose change. This wasn't just unfair, it was personal. I spent the next few days talking to other tenants, my boots wearing a path through the building's narrow halls. Old man Jenkins on the 3rd floor said he'd gotten a rent hike notice last month, triple what he could afford. "Hargrove's got no heart," he muttered, his hands trembling as he lit a cigarette. Maria, the single mom on the 2nd floor, told me Hargrove had been dodging repair requests for years, leaky pipes, broken heaters, but always had cash for new locks when someone missed rent. The more I heard, the hotter my anger burned. This wasn't just about me anymore. Hargrove was playing a game, and we were all pawns. By the end of the week, I was obsessed. I stopped going to work, called in sick, and spent hours staring at that eviction notice, pinned now to my fridge like a battle flag. I started noticing things I'd ignored before, how Hargrove's office in the basement was always locked, how he'd slip out late at night with a briefcase, his eyes darting, like a man with secrets. One night I saw him arguing with a guy in a fancy car outside the building, their voices low but heated. I couldn't hear much, but I caught one word: records. My gut told me there was more to Hargrove than greed. He was hiding something, and I was going to find out what. I started small, checking my lease, digging through old emails from Hargrove. There were clauses that didn't make sense, fees for maintenance that never happened, deposits he'd never returned. I borrowed Mrs. Delgado's lease, then Jenkins, comparing them. They were different, like Hargrove was making it, up as he went. My heart raced as I scribbled notes, my kitchen table covered in papers. I wasn't a lawyer, but I knew something was off. Late one night, I snuck down to the basement, my flashlight shaking in my hand. The office door was locked, but the dumpster nearby was overflowing. I dug through it, holding my breath against the stench, and found a torn ledger page, names, dates, and cash amounts that didn't match any rent I knew. My pulse pounded. This was it, evidence. Hargrove wasn't just a bad landlord. He was a criminal, but I had to be careful. Hargrove had eyes everywhere, maintenance guys who reported to him, tenants too scared to talk. I started feeling watched, my skin prickling when I walked the halls. Once I caught a shadow lingering outside my door, gone when I opened it. Was it Hargrove? Someone he'd sent? My apartment didn't feel safe anymore, but I couldn't stop. I photocopied that ledger page, hid it under my floorboards, and kept digging. Every creak in the building, every slammed door made me jump. I was in over my head, but the anger in my chest wouldn't let me quit. Hargrove thought he could break me, throw me out like trash. He was wrong. I was going to fight, and I was going to win. The ledger page I'd pulled from the dumpster was burning a hole in my mind, hidden under the loose floorboard in my bedroom. Every night I'd lie awake, the creaks of the Elm Street apartment building sounding louder, like the walls themselves were warning me to stop. But I couldn't. Hargrove had crossed a line, evicting me to line his pockets with some rich guy's cash, and that torn piece of paper, names, dates, amounts, was proof he was playing dirty, and I was done being his victim. I was going to bury him, but first I had to dig deeper, no matter how dangerous it got. The morning after I found the ledger page, I sat at my kitchen table, the eviction notice still pinned to my fridge like a taunt. My hands shook as I smoothed out the crumpled paper, its numbers and scribbled notes staring back at me. Tenant 4B, $500, cash, no receipt, it read. That was Mrs. Delgado's apartment. Another line, 2C, $300, maintenance fee, unrecorded. That was Maria's place. My heart pounded. Hargrove wasn't just overcharging, he was taking cash under the table, dodging taxes, maybe worse. I needed more proof, something solid enough to take him down. But where do you start when you're a mechanic, not a detective? I decided to talk to Mrs. Delgado again. She'd been in the building longer than anyone, and if Hargrove was pulling tricks, she'd know. I knocked on her door, the smell of fresh bread wafting out as she opened it. "Isaac, you look terrible," she said, her eyes narrowing. I forced a smile, stepping inside. Her apartment was warm, cluttered with photos of her kids, now grown and gone. I showed her the ledger page, keeping my voice low. "Have you ever paid Hargrove cash off the books?" Her face tightened, and she sat down hard, her hands twisting in her lap. "A few times," she admitted. "He said it was for extra. Repairs, but nothing got fixed. I didn't ask questions. You don't say no to Hargrove." Her fear made my stomach churn. If she was scared, what chance did I have? Mrs. Delgado gave me a name. "Tommy, the maintenance guy. He's Hargrove's eyes and ears," she whispered. "Always lurking, reporting back. If anyone knows what Hargrove's hiding, it's him." I thanked her, my mind racing. Tommy was a wiry guy with a permanent scowl, always tinkering with pipes or changing locks. I'd seen him slip into Hargrove's basement office late at night, carrying bags I never saw him leave with. If I could get to Tommy, I might find the key to Hargrove's secrets. But Tommy wasn't the type to talk, and I had a feeling he'd rat me out the second I asked the wrong question. That night, I waited in the stairwell, my flashlight off, listening for Tommy's heavy boots. The building was quiet. Most tenants asleep, but my nerves were electric. Around midnight I heard him, keys jangling, steps echoing. I peered through the crack in the door and saw him head to the basement, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. My pulse hammered. What was in that bag? I crept down after him, staying in the shadows, my sneakers silent on the concrete steps. The basement was damp, smelling of mold and rust, and I hid behind a stack of crates as Tommy unlocked Hargrove's office. He went inside, the door clicking shut. I waited, counting seconds, my breath shallow. 10 minutes later he came out, the bag gone, his hands empty. Whatever he'd dropped off, it was important. I needed to get into that office. The next day I borrowed a lock-picking kit from a buddy at the garage, a guy who'd had his own run-ins with bad landlords. "Be careful, man," he said, handing me the small leather case. "Guys like Hargrove don't play fair." I practiced on my own door, my fingers clumsy at first, but by evening I could pop the lock in under a minute. That night I went back to the basement, my heart in my throat. The hallway was dark, the only sound the hum of the water heater. I knelt by the office door, the lock-picking tools cold in my hands. Every scrape of metal felt like a scream in the silence. Sweat dripped down my back as the lock clicked open. I was in. The office was a mess. Papers everywhere, a desk buried under coffee cups and cigarette butts. I didn't have much time. I rifled through drawers, my flashlight beam dancing across faded receipts and handwritten notes. In a locked filing cabinet, which I pried open with a screwdriver, I found it, a second ledger thicker than the page I'd found, filled with entries. Cash payments, fake fees, even names of tenants who'd moved out, but whose apartments were rented again the next day. My hands shook as I stuffed pages into my jacket. This was dynamite. Hargrove was running a scam, cooking the books to hide thousands, maybe millions, in illegal cash. But I wasn't alone. A floorboard creaked behind me and I froze, my flashlight snapping off. The door was still closed, but I heard breathing, heavy and close. My heart slammed against my ribs. I crouched behind the desk, clutching the papers, praying whoever it was would leave. Footsteps shuffled, then stopped. "Who's there?" A voice growled, Tommy's voice. I held my breath, my mind racing. If he found me, I was done. The door creaked open, and light spilled in from the hallway. I saw his boots inches from the desk. My fingers tightened around the screwdriver, ready to fight if I had to. But then his phone rang, a shrill tone that made me flinch. "Yeah, boss," he muttered, stepping back. "I'll check it out." The door closed, and his footsteps faded. I waited, counting to 100, then slipped out, my legs trembling. Back in my apartment, I hid the ledger pages with the first one, my hands still shaking. I couldn't sleep, every noise making me jump. Tommy's voice echoed in my head, and I knew he'd seen something. Maybe not me, but enough to get suspicious. The next morning, I noticed him lingering outside my door, his eyes narrowing as I left for work. He didn't say anything, but the threat was clear. Hargrove's allies were circling, and I was running out of time. I needed help. I called Sarah, an old friend from high school who worked at the city clerk's office. "Isaac, you sound paranoid," she said when I told her about the ledgers. "But if this is real, it's big. Bring me what you've got." We met at a diner across town, my backpack heavy with photocopies. Sarah's eyes widened as she flipped through them. "This is fraud, Isaac. Tax evasion, maybe money laundering, but you need more. Bank records, witnesses, and you need to be careful. Guys like Hargrove have friends in high places." Her words hit hard. Friends in high places. Was that why Tommy was watching me? Was Hargrove already onto me? Back at the building, the tension was suffocating. Tenants avoided my eyes, like they knew I was stirring trouble. Mrs. Delgado stopped answering her door, and Maria whispered that Tommy had been asking about me. One night, I came home to find my apartment door ajar, the lock scratched. Nothing was missing, but the message was clear. Back off. My anger flared, hotter than ever. Hargrove thought he could scare me, but he didn't know me. I'd grown up in tougher places than this, fought harder fights. I started carrying a pocket knife, sleeping with a bat by my bed. If they wanted a war, I'd give them one. I kept digging, sneaking into the basement whenever I could, photographing documents, recording conversations I overheard. One night, I caught Hargrove on my phone's voice recorder talking to someone in the parking lot. "If anyone's sniffing around, handle it." he said, his voice low and cold. "I don't care how." My blood ran cold. "Handle it." Was that meant for me? I sent the recording to Sarah, my hands shaking as I hit send. She called me an hour later, her voice urgent. "Isaac, this is enough to get the housing board's attention, but you need to lay low. They're watching you." The next day, I saw a new face in the building, a tall guy in a leather jacket talking to Tommy in hushed tones. He followed me to the garage, his car idling a block behind mine. When I got home, my tires were slashed, the word "stop" scratched into my hood. My heart pounded, but my resolve hardened. Hargrove's allies could threaten me, tail me, wreck my car, but they couldn't stop me. I had the ledgers, the recordings, the truth. I was close, so close to tearing his empire apart. But every step I took brought me closer to the edge, and I knew one wrong move could cost me everything. The slashed tires on my car and the word "stop" scratched into the hood were a warning I couldn't ignore, but they only made me angrier. Hargrove thought he could scare me into silence, but he didn't know the fire burning in my chest. I was done hiding. I had the ledgers, the recordings, the proof of his dirty empire, cash scams, fake fees, tenants thrown out like garbage. Now it was time to strike back, to take everything I'd found to the authorities and watch Hargrove's world crumble. But the path to justice was a maze, and every step I took made me feel like a target. I woke up the next morning with my heart pounding, the photocopied ledger pages and my phone's recordings stashed in a backpack under my bed. I'd barely slept, jumping at every creak in the Elm Street apartment building, expecting Tommy or that guy in the leather jacket to bust through my door. My apartment felt like a cage, the eviction notice still pinned to my fridge, counting down the days until I'd lose everything. I couldn't wait any longer. Sarah, my friend at the city clerk's office, had said the housing board could nail Hargrove for fraud, maybe even worse, but she'd also warned me to lay low. Laying low wasn't an option anymore, not with my tires slashed and my nerves frayed to the breaking point. I called Sarah before dawn, my voice low as I paced my kitchen. "I'm taking it to the housing board today," I told her. "Everything, ledgers, recordings, all of it." She sighed, her voice tight. "Isaac, this is big, but it's risky. The board's slow and Hargrove's got connections. If he finds out it's you—" She didn't finish, but I knew what she meant. I'd seen the way Tommy watched me, the way that stranger tailed me to work. Hargrove's allies were closing in, and I was running out of time. "I have to try," I said, gripping the phone. "He's not just ruining me, he's hurting everyone in this building." Sarah promised to meet me at the city office, her voice softening. "Be careful, okay?" The city housing board was in a grey, hulking building downtown, all glass and steel, the kind of place that made you feel small. I walked in with my backpack slung over one shoulder, my hands sweaty as I clutched the straps. The lobby smelled like stale coffee and floor polish, and the receptionist barely looked up as I asked for the complaints desk. "Third floor," she muttered, pointing to the elevators. I felt eyes on me as I rode up, my reflection in the metal doors looking pale and tired. I hadn't shaved in days, my hair a mess, but I didn't care. All that mattered was the evidence in my bag and the hope it could stop Hargrove. On the third floor, I found a cramped office with flickering fluorescent lights and stacks of paper everywhere. A woman named Ms. Carter sat behind the counter, her glasses perched on her nose as she typed. I cleared my throat, my voice shaky. "I need to report a landlord for fraud." She glanced up, her expression bored. "Fill out these forms," she said, sliding a stack across the counter. "Include all evidence. We'll review it." I stood there, stunned. Forms. Review. "This is urgent," I said, leaning forward. "He's evicting people illegally, taking cash under the table. I have proof." Miss Carter sighed like she'd heard it all before. "Everyone thinks their case is urgent, sir. File the complaint and we'll get to it." I wanted to scream, but I sat down in a plastic chair and started filling out the forms, my pen scratching as I detailed Hargrove's scams. Every few minutes I glanced at the door, half expecting Tommy to walk in. When I handed the forms back, along with the photocopied ledger pages and a USB drive with the recordings, Ms. Carter barely looked at them. "We'll contact you if we need more," she said, tossing my file onto a pile. I felt like I'd just handed over my life's work to be forgotten. As I left, I called Sarah, my voice tight. "They didn't even care," I said. She promised to pull strings, talk to someone higher up, but I could hear the doubt in her voice. Back at the building, things were getting worse. I caught Hargrove in the hallway, his eyes locking onto mine for a second too long. He didn't say anything, but his fake smile was gone, replaced by something cold and calculating. I hurried to my apartment, my heart racing. Had he heard about my visit to the housing board? Did Tommy tell him I'd been in the basement? I checked the ledger pages under my floorboard, my hands shaking. They were still there, but I didn't feel safe. That night, I heard footsteps outside my door, slow and deliberate. I grabbed my bat, my pulse hammering, but no one knocked. When I looked out the peephole, the hallway was empty. I didn't sleep. The next day, Sarah called with news. "I got your file to a senior investigator, Mr. Patel," she said. "He's interested, but he needs you to testify in person, tomorrow, 10 a.m. My stomach twisted. Testify. That meant standing up, putting my name on everything, making myself a bigger target. But I'd come too far to back out. "I'll be there," I said. I spent the night preparing, going over every detail, the ledgers, the fake fees, the recording of Hargrove saying, "Handle it." I felt like I was arming myself for battle, but the fear wouldn't leave me. Hargrove wasn't just a landlord, he was a predator, and I was poking his nest. The meeting with Mr. Patel was in a conference room that smelled like old carpet. He was a short man with sharp eyes, his desk covered in files. Sarah sat beside me, her presence steadying me. I laid out the evidence, my voice steady at first, but cracking as I described the eviction notice, the slashed tires, the threats. Patel listened, taking notes, his face unreadable. When I played the recording, his eyebrows shot up. "This is compelling," he said, leaning back, "but we need corroboration, other tenants, bank records, something to tie this to Hargrove. Directly, can you get more?" I nodded, my throat dry. "More. Always more. And Mr. Delgado," he added, "if this goes forward, Hargrove will know it's you. He's connected. City officials, real estate boards. Are you prepared for that?" I swallowed hard, the weight of Hargrove's stare in the hallway flashing in my mind. "I don't have a choice," I said. Leaving the office, I felt a mix of hope and dread. Patel was taking me seriously, but Hargrove's connections scared me. I needed allies in the building, tenants willing to speak up. I started with Maria, the single mom on the second floor. She hesitated, her eyes darting to her daughter playing nearby. "If I talk, he'll come for us," she whispered. "He's done it before." I pushed, telling her about the housing board, the evidence, but she shook her head. "I'm sorry, Isaac." Old man Jenkins was no better. He listened but said he was too old for trouble. Mrs. Delgado was my only hope, but when I knocked, her door stayed shut. I slipped a note under it, begging her to meet me. The silence was suffocating. Meanwhile, Hargrove was on edge. I saw him yelling at Tommy in the parking lot, his face red, gesturing wildly. Later, Tommy cornered me in the stairwell, his breath sour with cigarettes. "You've been talking, haven't you?" he hissed, shoving me against the wall. I pushed. "You back," my heart pounding. "Back off, Tommy." He smirked, his eyes glinting. "Boss knows someone's snitching. Won't take long to figure out who." He walked away, leaving me shaking. That night, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You're making enemies." I stared at the screen, my blood running cold. Hargrove was tightening the noose, and I was running out of moves. I doubled down, spending hours at the library, searching public records for Hargrove's other properties. I found more. Complaints filed years ago, dismissed too fast to be legit. He'd been at this for decades, greasing palms to keep his scams quiet. I emailed Patel the links, my fingers trembling as I typed. Sarah called, her voice urgent. "They're scheduling a hearing with Hargrove next week," she said. "Your evidence is enough to trigger it, but he'll be there, Isaac. He'll know it's you." I felt a chill. A hearing meant confrontation, maybe even retaliation. But it also meant Hargrove was scared, his empire cracking under pressure. The day before the hearing, I saw the leather jacket guy again, leaning against a van outside the building. He didn't follow me, but his presence was a threat, a reminder of Hargrove's reach. I stopped going to work entirely, my boss leaving voicemails I didn't answer. My world was this fight, nothing else. I met Mrs. Delgado one last time, catching her in the laundry room. "Please," I begged, showing her the ledger page with her name. "If you testify, we can stop him." Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "For my kids," she whispered. It was a small victory, but it felt like hope. As the hearing loomed, I felt like I was walking a tightrope. Hargrove's suspicion was a shadow over everything, his allies watching my every move. I kept the bat by my door, the pocket knife in my jeans. My apartment was a fortress, but it wouldn't hold forever. I'd struck a blow, gotten the authorities' attention, but Hargrove wasn't down yet. He was fighting back, and I knew the real battle was just beginning. The housing board hearing was a ticking bomb, and I could feel Hargrove's eyes on me, even when he wasn't there, and I'd pushed too far to turn back now. The ledgers, the recordings, Mrs. Delgado's promise. To testify, it was all coming together, but Hargrove's threats were closing in. The slashed tires, the stranger in the leather jacket, the late-night text telling me to stop, they haunted me. I wasn't just fighting for my apartment anymore. I was fighting for everyone in the Elm Street building, for justice. But justice wasn't enough. I wanted to hit Hargrove where it hurt most, his power. That's when the idea hit me, wild and impossible. What if I didn't just stop him? What if I took everything he had? The hearing was 3 days away, and I was a wreck. My apartment felt like a prison. The eviction notice on my fridge, a constant reminder of what I stood to lose. I hadn't slept properly in weeks, my eyes bloodshot, my hands shaky from too much coffee. Tommy was still watching me, lurking in the stairwell, and I'd seen Hargrove whispering with that leather jacket guy in the parking lot. They knew someone was behind the housing board's investigation, and I was sure they suspected me. Every creak in the building made me grab the bat by my bed, my pocket knife always in my jeans. But fear wasn't stopping me, it was fuel. I'd found Hargrove's weakness, his dirty empire built on lies, and I was going to tear it down. The idea to buy the building came out of nowhere, sparked by something Sarah said over coffee at the day after my meeting with Mr. Patel. "Hargrove's in deep," she'd told me, flipping through a report she'd pulled from city records. "Fines are piling up from past violations, and if the hearing goes bad, he might have to sell assets to cover them." My heart skipped. Sell assets? Like the Elm Street building? I leaned forward, my voice low. What if someone bought it before he could recover? Sarah laughed, thinking I was joking, but her face changed when she saw my eyes. "Isaac, you're a mechanic. You don't have that kind of money." She was right, but I couldn't shake the thought. Owning the building, kicking Hargrove out, it wasn't just revenge, it was poetic. I started crunching numbers that night, my kitchen table buried under papers. I'd saved a little over the years, a few thousand tucked away for emergencies, but it was nowhere near enough. The building was old, probably worth less than the fancy condos downtown, but still out of my league. I called my boss at the garage, apologizing for skipping work, and asked about a loan. "You're crazy, Isaac," he said, but he gave me the name of a bank teller he knew, a guy named Carl who'd helped him out once. I called Carl the next morning, my voice shaking as I explained my plan. "I need a loan fast," I said, "to buy an apartment building." He didn't laugh, which was a start. "Come in tomorrow," he said. "Bring everything you've got. Savings, pay stubs, proof you're serious." The bank was a sleek, intimidating place, all marble floors and people in suits who looked at me like I didn't belong. Carl was different, middle-aged, balding, with a kind smile. I sat across from him, my backpack heavy with documents, my savings account statements, my lease, even the ledger pages to show why Hargrove was a bad bet. "I've lived in this building 5 years, I told him, my hands clasped tight to stop them trembling. "Hargrove's running it into the ground, but I can turn it around. The tenants deserve better." Carl listened, flipping through my papers, his brow furrowed. "This is unconventional," he said finally. "But I've seen worse risks pay off. The building's undervalued because of Hargrove's fines. If you can cover a down payment, I'll push for a loan." My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear him. A down payment? I had maybe 10 grand scraped together from years of overtime. "How much?" I asked, my throat dry. He tapped his calculator. 20,000, minimum. And you'll need steady income to cover the mortgage. 20,000. It was double what I had, and my job was hanging by a thread after all the days I'd missed. I left the bank feeling like I'd been punched, but I wasn't giving up. I called Sarah, my words tumbling out. "I need 10 grand fast. Any ideas?" She was quiet for a long moment. "There's a community fund for tenant rights," she said. "Small loans for people fighting landlords. I can get you an application, but Isaac, this is a long shot." The next 2 days were a blur. I filled out the community fund application, my hands cramping as I wrote about Hargrove's scams, the eviction, the threats. Sarah helped me polish it, her eyes worried but supportive. I went back to Carl with my savings and a promise from the fund that they'd review my case. "You're determined, I'll give you that," Carl said, a spark of respect in his voice. He agreed to start the loan process, using my savings and the potential fund money as collateral. Meanwhile, the hearing was tomorrow, and I was set to testify alongside Mrs. Delgado. I felt like I was juggling knives. One wrong move, and everything would collapse. The hearing was chaos. The room was packed. Tenants, reporters, even a few city officials. Hargrove sat at a table up front, his suit crisp, his face calm, but his eyes darting like a trapped animal. I sat in the back, my backpack at my feet, my stomach in knots. Mrs. Delgado was next to me, her hands clasped tight, whispering prayers under her breath. Mr. Patel presented the evidence, ledgers, recordings, my testimony about the eviction. When I took the stand, my voice shook at first, but I found my rhythm telling the room about Hargrove's cash scams, the fake fees, the fear he spread. Hargrove stared at me, his jaw tight, and I knew he'd figured it out. I was the snitch. The board's questions were brutal. "How do we know these ledgers are real?" one official asked. "Why didn't you report this sooner?" another said. I answered as best I could, sweat dripping down my back. Mrs. Delgado's testimony helped. She spoke softly but clearly, confirming the cash payments, the threats. By the end, the room was buzzing, and Hargrove's lawyer was scrambling. Patel told the board they'd rule in a week, but the damage was done. Hargrove's fines were mounting, and whispers of criminal charges floated through the crowd. As I left, Hargrove brushed past me, his voice low. "You're a dead man, Isaac." My blood ran cold, but I met his eyes. "We'll see," I said. That night, I got the call from Carl. "The loan's approved," he said. "The community fund came through, and with your savings, we've got enough. The building's yours if you sign tomorrow." I sat down hard, my head spinning. Mine. The Elm Street building, the place Hargrove had ruled like a king, was about to be mine. I barely slept, my mind racing with plans, fixing the pipes, lowering rents, making it a home again. But first, I had to face Hargrove. He didn't know yet, and I wanted to see his face when he found out. The next morning I signed the papers at the bank, my hand steady despite the nerves clawing at my gut. Carl handed me the deed, the weight of it heavier than I expected. "You're a landlord now," he said, smiling. I thanked him, my voice thick, and drove straight to the building. Hargrove was in his basement office, packing boxes, his face red with anger. The hearing had hit him hard, and rumors were spreading that he'd have to sell to cover his fines. He didn't know I'd beaten him to it. I knocked on the open door, my heart pounding but my face calm. "Hargrove," I said, leaning against the frame. He looked up, his eyes narrowing. "What do you want, Isaac? Come to gloat?" His voice was bitter, his hands gripping a stack of papers. I stepped inside, letting the moment stretch, savoring the power shift. "I'm here to talk business," I said, tossing the deed onto his desk. He frowned, picking it up, his eyes scanning the page. The color drained from his face, his hands shaking. "What is this?" he stammered. I crossed my arms, my voice steady. "I own this building now. You're done here, evicted. 30 days. Sound familiar?" The air was thick, his shock turning to rage. "You?" he spat, standing so fast his chair tipped over. "You think you can take this from me?" He stepped toward me, his fists clenched, but I didn't flinch. I'd faced worse than him. Years of scraping by, nights of fear, threats that didn't break me. "It's over, Hargrove," I said. "Pack your things and get out." For a moment I thought he'd swing, his breath heavy, his eyes wild. But then he sank back, defeated, the fight draining out of him. I turned and walked out, my heart racing but my head high. The hunter had become the hunted, and I'd won. That night, I stood on the roof of the building, my building, looking out over the city. The weight of what I'd done hadn't fully hit me. Tenants were already talking, whispers of hope spreading through the halls. Mrs. Delgado hugged me in the stairwell, tears in her eyes. Maria asked if the rent hikes would stop. I promised they would. But Hargrove's threat, "You're a dead man," still echoed in my mind. He wasn't gone yet, and I knew men like him didn't go quietly. The battle was won, but the war wasn't over. The deed to the Elm Street apartment building was in my hands, but it felt heavier than paper. It was power, responsibility, and a promise I wasn't sure I could keep. I'd done the impossible. I'd taken Hargrove's empire, turned his own game against him, and kicked him out with the same cold eviction notice he'd nailed to my door. Standing on the roof that night, the city lights flickering below, I felt like a king. But Hargrove's words, "You're a dead man," clung to me like damp air. I'd won the battle, but men like him didn't vanish quietly. My revenge wasn't complete until I rebuilt what he'd broken and faced whatever he threw at me next. The first morning as landlord, I woke up early. My apartment still cluttered with tools and car manuals. The eviction notice now crumpled in. A drawer. I didn't need it anymore. It was a relic of Hargrove's reign. I walked the halls, my boots echoing, and for the first time, the building didn't feel like a trap. Tenants peeked out their doors, their eyes curious, some hopeful, others wary. Mrs. Delgado caught me on the second floor, her hands flour-dusted from baking. "Is it true, Isaac?" she asked, her voice soft. "You're in charge now." I nodded and she hugged me, her grip fierce. "You're a good boy," she whispered. Her trust hit me hard, a reminder of what I was fighting for. I started small, meeting with tenants in the basement laundry room, the only space big enough for a crowd. About a dozen showed up. Mrs. Delgado, Maria, Old Man Jenkins, and others I'd only nodded to in passing. "No more rent hikes," I promised. My voice, steady despite the nerves in my gut. "We'll fix the pipes, the heaters, the leaks. This place is ours now." Maria's eyes widened, her daughter clinging to her leg. "What about Hargrove?" she asked. "He's gone," I said, hoping it was true. Jenkins coughed, his voice rough. "He's got friends, Isaac. Watch your back." I nodded, the weight of their trust settling on me. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about building something better. Fixing the building wasn't easy. I used the loan money to hire plumbers and electricians, my savings draining fast. The pipes groaned, like they resented being touched, and every repair uncovered another problem: rotted walls, faulty wiring. I worked alongside the crew, my mechanic's hands useful for once, learning as I went. Tenants started helping too. Maria organized a cleaning day, and kids scrubbed graffiti off the lobby walls. Mrs. Delgado baked for everyone, her cookies a small comfort in the chaos. Slowly, the building came to life. Lights stayed on, water ran clear, and the halls smelled less like mold. Every step felt like a middle finger to Hargrove, but the emotional toll was heavy. At night, alone in my apartment, I'd stare at the ceiling, my mind replaying everything: the eviction notice, the slashed tires, Hargrove's threat. Had it been worth it? I'd lost weeks of sleep, my job was on thin ice, and I'd put everyone in the building at risk by poking Hargrove's nest. Guilt gnawed at me, especially when I saw Maria's daughter flinch at loud noises, or when Jenkins muttered about trouble coming. I'd wanted justice, but revenge had a cost, and I was paying it in sleepless nights and a constant knot in my chest. Sarah checked in often, her calls a lifeline. "You're doing good, Isaac," she said one evening, her voice warm over the phone. "The housing board ruled against Hargrove. He's facing criminal charges, fraud, tax evasion, maybe more." My heart lifted, but only for a moment. "He's still out there," I said, my voice low. Sarah sighed. "He's broke. Isaac, fines cleaned him out. He can't hurt you now." I wanted to believe her, but Hargrove's shadow lingered. I kept my bat by the door, my pocket knife close, and I checked the locks twice every night. The tenants started to trust me, and that trust was a fragile, precious thing. I lowered rents where I could, using what was left of the loan to cover costs. I set up a mailbox for complaints, and people actually used it. Notes about sticky windows, noisy radiators, small things Hargrove had ignored. I fixed what I could myself, climbing ladders, patching walls, my hands blistered, but my heart full. One day, Maria slipped me a drawing from her daughter, a crayon sketch of the building with a big sun overhead. "She says it's home now," Maria said, her eyes soft. I pinned it to my fridge, right where the eviction notice used to be. But Hargrove wasn't gone. I'd hear rumors, tenants saying they'd seen him in a bar across town, ranting about that kid who stole my building. Tommy, his old maintenance guy, had vanished. But I caught the leather jacket guy watching the building one night, his cigarette glowing in the dark. I tightened security, installing cameras with loan leftovers, but the fear never left me. I started wondering if revenge had been a mistake, if I'd traded one prison for another. The building was mine, but so was the target on my back. Then, 3 weeks after the deed was signed, it happened, the twist I should have seen coming. I was in the basement checking a fuse box when my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Get to the city clerk's office. Now." Her voice was urgent when I called back. "Hargrove filed a claim," she said. "He's saying the sale was illegal, that you forged documents. He's trying to take the building back." My blood ran cold. Forged documents? It was a lie, but Hargrove was desperate, clawing for any way to hurt me. "It won't hold up," Sarah said, "but you need to fight it today." I drove downtown, my hands gripping the wheels so tight my knuckles whitened. The clerk's office was busy, but Sarah met me at the door, her face grim. She'd pulled Hargrove's claim, a stack of papers accusing me of fraud, backed by a witness statement from Tommy. My stomach twisted. Tommy, that snake, was lying for Hargrove, claiming I'd bribed Carl at the bank. It was nonsense, but Hargrove's connections ran deep, and I knew how these things worked. Money and lies could bury the truth. "We'll counter it," Sarah said, leading me to a meeting room. "Carl's already agreed to testify. The community fund has your back too." The hearing was set for that afternoon, a rushed affair because of Hargrove's push. I sat in a stuffy room, my suit borrowed from a neighbour, my heart pounding. Hargrove was there, looking thinner, his suit wrinkled, but his eyes burned with hate. Tommy sat beside him, smirking like he'd already won. The judge, an older woman with a no-nonsense stare, read the claim while Sarah presented my defence. The deed, Carl's testimony, records of Hargrove's fines. I took the stand, my voice steady despite the fear in my gut. I bought the building fair and square, I said. Hargrove's lying because he lost. He's been scamming tenants for years. Check the housing board's ruling. Hargrove's lawyer tried to twist my words, painting me as a schemer, but Carl's testimony shut him down. Isaac's loan was legitimate, Carl said, his voice calm. Hargrove's claim is baseless. Tommy's story fell apart under questioning, his lies tripping over each other. The judge ruled in my favour, dismissing Hargrove's claim. "This is a waste of the court's time," she said, her gavel cracking like thunder. Hargrove's face went white, his hands shaking as he stood. He glared at me, but there was no fight left in him, just a broken man grasping at ghosts. Should have felt triumphant, but as I left the courthouse, a weight settled on me. Hargrove's retaliation had been his last shot, a desperate swing that missed. He was done. His empire gone, his threats empty. But what had I become? I'd wanted justice, but revenge had consumed me, every sleepless night, every jump at a shadow. Back at the building, I walked the halls, seeing the changes I'd made. Fresh paint, working lights, tenants who smiled instead of flinched. It was worth it, I told myself, but the scars remained. That night, Mrs. Delgado invited me for dinner, her apartment warm with the smell of stew. Maria was there, her daughter colouring at the table. Jenkins showed up too, grumbling but smiling. We ate, laughed, told stories of the old days before Hargrove's grip tightened. "You saved us," Mrs. Delgado said, her hand on mine. I shook my head. "We saved each other," I said, my voice thick. Later, on the roof, I looked out over the city. The buildings hum steady beneath me. Hargrove was gone, his final play a failure. I'd won, not just the building, but a community, a home. The emotional aftermath lingered. I'd go back to work soon, rebuild my life, but I'd never forget the cost of revenge. It had given me power, but it had taken pieces of me too. Every creak in the floorboards, every turn of a key reminded me of what I'd fought for. Justice wasn't sweet. It was hard, messy, and mine to keep.